Everyone, namaskaram. It's always a great pleasure to come to God's own country, and this campus is in the picturesque setting fitting the God's own country. So it is my privilege to be here with you today and to talk about issues which I have been actually debated completely all beyond my expectations since 3 years ago we submitted this Western Ghat Ecology Expert Panel. Issues relating to development, what development means and how it should relate to environmental issues, conservation issues, to democracy, to democratic revolution, which was the core of our report. The recent election, throughout the election, our new respected Prime Minister, Narendra Modi ji, he talked about Vikas, that he is going to focus, he is going to talk about the Gujarat model of, is to implement the Gujarat model of development throughout the country, which he said was a very vibrant and significant model which should now lead our whole country. And he now has the mandate. I am not quite aware of his spelling out what the Gujarat model of development is. But I was very happy that soon after being elected, the first country he visited outside of India was Bhutan. And I also had the opportunity of visiting Bhutan not so long ago. And what strikes you when you land at the Paro airport in Bhutan is the fact that there is a huge billboard which says that we are a country not dedicated to maximizing gross national product, but maximizing gross national happiness. And this notion that development should relate to enhancement of happiness is, I think, a very appropriate notion even in the Indian cultural context, because the word we use and which Modi ji also has been using, Vikas, if you look at what the original meaning of Vikas is, Vikas means blooming of a flower, opening of a flower bud. And if you look at the traditional use of the word Vikas in the really modern sense, in a sense, it occurs almost 2,500 years, 100 years ago in this Jain philosophical discussions. The Jainas says that the Kala Chakra, the wheel of the time, it is spinning all the time. Sometimes it goes from Dukkha towards Sukha, from Sukha towards Dukkha. In particular, they say, there are periods when it goes from Ati Dukkha to Ati Sukha. And those are the periods of Vikasa. So, in general, enhancement of happiness of the population, as I said, this 2,500-year-old philosophy in India equates that with enhancement of the happiness of the population. Vikasa is enhancing the happiness of the population. Avanati, or decline, regress, they say is going from Ati Sukha to Ati Dukkha, according to Jain philosophy, and increase in the Dukkha, the level of unhappiness of the population. So, Modi ji must have seen that billboards, those could not have failed to strike him. And he probably had discussions with members of the parliament. Now, in this remarkable country, you have a king who was very popular. There was no pressure for him to yield his authority. He said that in this 21st century, monarchy is out of fashion, that we should have democracy, and voluntarily he yielded power to democratically elected parliament. Now they have had 2 elections in Bhutan, and I have had, in fact, an opportunity to spend 2 days in Bhutan with the newly elected members of the parliament. And we're talking about this Bhutan's gross national happiness and what are the foundations on which Bhutan expects to enhance gross national happiness. And they said that officially we talk about 4 important pillars of this our pursuit of gross national happiness. First is good governance. Second is environmental protection. Third is maintenance of social harmony. And fourth is the traditional Buddhist values. And those values, in particular, they stress on mutualism, that we should have development in society where different segments of the society mutually help each other, mutually support each other. Now, as I said, Modi ji visited Bhutan as his first country, but after coming back, he made, also before going there, and after coming back, he has been making particular statements which I found very encouraging. One phrase he has often used, firstly, immediately after his election on May 16th, in the first speech he gave in Ahmedabad, and also the concluding speech at the conclusion of the first session of Parliament, he said, "Vikas ko Janandolan banayenge." We'll make development people's movement. And certainly, what Bhutan is talking about is, in a sense, very compatible with taking development to people. If it is, development is to enhance the happiness of the population, that is what we want to do. But now, I have been asking my many friends who are great admirers of Modi ji, exactly how is the new government going to make Vikas Janandolan? What is the concrete content? And I have not found any particular statement, articulation of what is the content. Vikas Janandolan kaisa hum bana rahe hain? So what is the content that appears today? And I had an opportunity, Mr. Prakash Javadekar, he also hails from Pune, where I originally come from, though I spent most of my life in Karnataka. Anyway, so I know Prakash Javadekar. I talked to him and I asked him, "Kaisa badayenge Vikas Janandolan?" He also has those specific things to say, what he has been doing. And as a scientist, I think it is one's duty to talk primarily of objective facts. When you talk of development, and in fact a lot of economic issues, I think the weapons of mass disturbance have not been silenced. When we talk of many economic issues, social issues, a lot of vague statements are made. As a person trained in natural science, I think it is our responsibility to talk about objective facts, what can be verified. And I am very fond of an edict for scientists of Alfred North Whitehead. He is a great mathematician and a philosopher of science. Whitehead says that science must anchor itself firmly on the bedrock of empirical facts, however unpalatable those facts may be. And I think, of course, my great crime was that we tried to anchor Western Ghat Ecology Expert Panel report on bedrock of a lot of empirical facts, which turned out to be unpalatable to powers that be. Anyway, I will also repeat here today such unpalatable facts, and we will have a lot of time at the end that you can take me on and say I'm talking whatever nonsense, or come up with whatever your alternate formulations. But I think what Mr. Javadekar is actually implementing is fast clearances of all sorts of projects, and fast clearances which do away with environmental requirements as per our laws. I mean, these are not any arbitrary requirements. These are all part of the laws our parliament has passed. They are simply ignoring the requirements of those laws, they are also ignoring the democratic procedure. We have, especially with the 73rd and 74th amendments, tried to operationalize democratic devolution. We have many systems of passing on the powers of decision making to local bodies. These are also being completely ignored, set aside. So, Vikas is being made a Janandolan, I wonder, by giving fast clearances, ignoring people's rights, and ignoring our country's laws. This doesn't seem very reasonable to me, and this is what I want to talk about. And this is what a good friend of mine, Amit Bhaduri, you might have heard of, some of you who are students of economics, he's one of India's most distinguished economists. He calls it development by dispossession. And I will also try to elaborate what he has taught me of what this development by dispossession is. I think the best thing to start with is a case study. Our Kulbhushan ji also talked about the importance of case study. I am a field ecologist and I believe in concrete understanding of concrete situations. So I spent some time with a village called Chambanmudi in Patnam Thitta district of Kerala, where there is this quarry, a big stone quarry associated with some stone crushers which are making artificial sand. And I think when I reached there, they were saying it was some 250th day of very determined protest by the villagers of Chambanmudi that they don't want this quarry. And Gram Sabha of Chambanmudi and Panchayat have passed many resolutions to this effect. We saw in the field the quarry has led to landslides, to blockage of water sources, to spoliation of agricultural land. This, of course, I could not personally verify, but apparently the local people confirmed that over the years the quarry has been operating in recent times. There has been a significant increase in lung and other ailments, and the mothers of school-going children have given a petition to the collector that with the incessant lorry traffic, their children simply cannot concentrate attention on any studies. So there is obviously a series of issues. And what is the kind of employment generated by this mine? Apparently just a relatively small number of labor are working there. And almost all of them are from Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh. These are people which Kulbhushan ji called ecological refugees. That the mines have devastated their native habitats. So they are here in Kerala to work on mines here. And this is again, I cannot verify, but there are strong rumors that from time to time there are accidents in this mine. And there is a very simple device. Apparently the mine has gone very deep. So the dead body of the worker, you drop in that. Well, apparently, and he is from Chhattisgarh, and nobody really can trace where he has gone and what is happening to him. So these are horror stories, as I said, which sound plausible, but I do not have concrete evidence. But certainly as objective facts, I can state that agriculture, water resources, and health of people there, educational opportunities certainly seem to be suffering. And objective fact that Gram Sabha, Gram Panchayats have made specific resolution, they don't want the quarry. So this is, and then I found, began to ask around, what is the procedure for giving sanction to these quarries and so on. And since there are many friends in Kerala, they began to ask questions. And this led to a report, I understand, which was tabled in the legislature of Kerala, Kerala legislature by, I think, Public Account Committee of Kerala legislature. that out of the 1650 stone crusher units associated with such quarries in the state of Kerala, 1500 are without any license, without any permit. So 1500 out of 1650 represent lawless activity. So clearance is no problem anywhere, not in Kerala, anywhere else. So faster clearance base sitting in Delhi may not make much difference. It will simply be perhaps promoting on a master scale Chembalmudi model of development. Or in Karnataka, I spent much time what we have come to understand Ballari model of development, where again no less things were done, state borders were moved around, and so the mines were neither in Karnataka nor in Andhra, and complete lawlessness could prevail for a very long time. And they have a term, I actually went there, I have many friends from that area. I asked them, they said yes, most of the ore was zero permit ore. I said, what is zero permit ore? I said, there is no official such thing, but zero permit ore is that ore has that, there is no kind of legal requirement for anything. You just load it in trucks, and the trucks go to Mangalore port or Madgaon port in Goa, and that's the end of it. And the gentleman apparently who was one of the main beneficiaries ended up with a solid gold throne on which he sat and presided. Anyway, so this is, as I said, development, and in Ballari I did not describe, but I went to some villages around the mines, and much worse than actually Chembalmudi conditions prevailed in terms of dispossession of the local villagers, alienation of access to land, water, a whole lot of resources, certainly peace of mind and survival. All of that has happened. Now, what kind of the main justification for growth, of course, is that India is a large country, we have a growing population, and we must create more and more jobs. And what is the statistics? As I understand, the statistics is the following, that when India was in the throes of what was contemptuously called Hindu rate of growth of some 3 to 4%, with the Hindu rate of growth of 3 to 4%, the rate of growth of employment in organized sector, which is the only kind of record available, rate of growth of employment in organized sector was 2% per year. When the Hindu rate of growth was overtaken by whatever that rate is called, 7-8% rate of growth, the rate of growth of employment in organized sector has come down from 2% to 1%. So this growth, this economic growth is not creating jobs as far as objective statistics available to us is concerned. And that statistics does not reflect at all what is happening to jobs which are not question of created but are lost. And there is, I will give you an example. I have been working in Goa for the last 3 years. Goa mining, jobs created and jobs lost. When the illegality of mining in Goa also came to such a crescendo that a commission was set up, the Justice Shah Commission, which has reported that 35,000 crore rupees worth of illegal mining has taken place in Goa over the last 2 years. And so the government could not quite ignore it. They stopped mining for a while under orders of Supreme Court. Then they made a huge hue and cry that mining was creating so many jobs. And this anti-development environmentalist stopping the mining has meant misery for tens of thousands, if not more, of Goans who have lost their job. And the government of Goa has not taken any step to get back any of this 35,000 crore rupees from those who are by name mentioned in the report as having made these illegal gains. But from taxpayers' money, they declare they are going to give unemployment bonus. People should come to register. and they said at least 1,25,000 people have been rendered jobless. And 6 months later, the total number of people who registered and asked for this unemployment bonus was, believe it or not, no more than something like 500. So where is 1,25,000 which was said to be those who have rendered jobless, and 500 who actually came to claim? So there is a whole lot of such bogus statistics which is floated around about the organized sector creating jobs. And this is the reality. Organized sector, in fact, nowadays, two things happen. Firstly, again, my friend Amit Bhaduri has the detailed economics of it he has worked out. I won't go into it anyway, I'm not very competent, but he says basically to create one job in organized industries or services sector, you need much more land, much more water, and these kind of resources than to create a job or maintain a job in sectors like agriculture or fisheries. So you necessarily destroy more jobs in agriculture and fisheries than you can ever create in organized sector. And this is a dilemma, and we have to, I'm not advocating, and we'll debate it perhaps, I'm not advocating that there shall be no organized industry or services, but this we cannot ignore, that in fact there is a lot of jobs getting destroyed which are not being accounted for. And I will give just one example of a study we did informally on behalf of Western Ghat Ecology Expert Panel of a chemical industry complex in Maharashtra at a place called Lote. The industrial complex employs 11,000 people. The pollution of the river Vashishti there has certainly destroyed large number of the livelihoods of fisher folk. The fisher folk claim that 20,000 people have lost employment. That is the official study. But anyway, so these are the kind of figures which one should ponder about when we are talking about what is development. And actually, technology simply is continually moving in a direction that human beings are becoming more and more redundant. And certainly there is no escape in a way that the modern sector will use more and more advanced technology. They say, to take an example, in United States also people are talking a lot about unemployment at all levels. So the least skillful job in United States and the worst paid job is that you sit at a McDonald's joint and you flip hamburgers on a hot plate and then give them, put them on a bun and give them to the people. So now McDonald's has robots which will do that. So you don't need people flipping buns also. So those who have jobs are lost. My son is a mathematician, and one of his areas of research is using computers to prove new mathematical theorems. And believe me, computers are today proving mathematical theorems which mathematicians cannot prove. So at that end also, jobs are being lost. And my son-in-law is an engineer, and he hires computing power for some $5 an hour, and that computing power, which is much well below the minimum wage rate in the United States, and that computing power is of a level that can defeat in a chess game Kasparov also. So you have at both ends, and this technological progress is making human beings redundant, and this is an issue which we have to examine. But we cannot, and I fully agree, we must find ways of moving forward, but we cannot simply make bogus claims that these industries are actually creating jobs when they are not. And we cannot allow them, therefore, on the pretext that they are creating jobs, of destroying agriculture, of destroying water resources, of destroying fisheries, which are providing today livelihood for a large number of people. So this is a dilemma before us, and much more so in India. And this is a dilemma which, of course, the Bharatiya Janata Party also squarely faced in 2005 election, when they went on this great Shining India campaign. they were thinking that the Shining India they had created had made people happy. But because of this contradiction, there was a whole lot of sentiment against Shining India, and that Shining India was, in a sense, based on such shine coming from dispossession of lot of people. So they got voted out. Now we are talking about Vikas. So you cannot talk about Shining India today. So we will talk about Vikas Janandolat Badayenge. But unless you give some genuine content to it, the same story will go on repeating, that you will, under false pretenses, promote environment, all these fast clearances, saying that what matters and what is important is high rate of economic growth, that without high rate of economic growth, wealth cannot be created, and without creating wealth, it cannot be shared. It will trickle down, and then eventually everybody will be happy. Unfortunately, the problem is the way the growth is being implemented, it is not a trickle down, but a suck-up process. That indeed it is merely sucking up resources and taking away already available livelihoods from people, rather than trickling down of benefits and enhancing their qualities of their life. And this is, as I said, the dilemma which we also fairly squarely talked about in Western Ghat Ecology expert panel report. And what should we do about it? And the problem has been that there has not been any consistent, serious thinking, even on the behalf of environmental activists and social activists on these issues. I have a number of friends amongst both environmental activists and social activists. All that, and what has happened so far is that they see that certain kinds of developments are to them either excessively destructive of environment or doing excessive injustice to people. So you agitate against them and you stop those developments. So like Aranmora Airport, it was very clear that there was a whole lot of issues with that airport. That you were violating, of course, Kerala wetland protection law. You were violating the promise to landless people that land was taken over, which would be given for them for cultivation. You were giving that land, which was promised to landless people of Kerala for cultivation for this project. There were a whole lot of other things also, but we're not going to. So you oppose that. You oppose that and perhaps succeed in stopping that project. But where do you end up? I have a very vigorous lady activist, Ulkam Hazar, who says that sometimes she feels that she has spent her entire life as a fire engine driver. That fires are lit here and there, and she drives what is her own fire engine and calls on people come douse those fires. But there is no progress, that all the time these things are happening and there is no alternatives being proposed at all. And unless the environmental, social activists, all of us who are concerned, not necessarily those who are activists, all of us who are concerned citizens, come up with an alternative framework of basically what principles we would like to be implemented and concrete ways in which they can be implemented, it will be very difficult, I think, to make any genuine progress. And I would like to suggest a few principles, and these are also broadly accepted, that a state has to act as a trustee of public resources, and it should not continually be privatizing public resources. Today, a major plank of so-called development is making over for private profit public resources, as was being done at Aranmora, for instance. A number of clearly public resources were being given to this airport and so on, all over. So you must stop, you must genuinely act as trustee of public resources and not make them over for private profit. You must stop perverse subsidies. Actually, I started thinking of these environment development issues when in 1975, basket weavers of Karnataka geared our then finance minister saying that the paper industry was destroying their livelihoods. They asked me to look at it. So, and in fact, I went and gave some lectures at IIM, which was interesting. Now, I looked at how the paper industry was operating, how the basket weavers were operating, what was happening to bamboo, and bamboo was being purchased by basket weavers on open market. This is 1975 at 1,500 rupees per ton. And the government was giving bamboo to the paper industry at 1.5 rupee per ton. So this is an incredible level of perverse subsidy. Now students in Bangalore IIM at least were completely innocent that such things existed in objective world. I gave them a talk and I said, and they did not listen fully and they started afterwards, oh, markets will take care of everything. I said, if markets are taking care of everything, how is paper industry getting at 1.5 rupee a ton when the markets are dictating 1,500 rupees a ton? So these perverse subsidies are a major feature of India's economic, this 7-8% growth. We have to stop, I believe, perverse subsidies. Everybody must pay, including polluters also must pay for alleviating pollution. In the same study we worked with paper industry, the Kali River is polluted, again the fishery is destroyed, the paper industry does nothing. And it is not that it cannot do anything. Because of this work with paper industry, I got friendly with some paper technologists from all over the world. There was a gentleman from Finland working for paper industry. He told me that in 1950s, Finnish paper industry also, Finland is a mountainous country which produces a lot of paper. So in 50s, we were also using very polluting technologies. We were forced to develop and completely stop pollution. Today, Finnish paper industry produces a lot of paper without any pollution. And he said, interestingly, that the company he works for makes more money by selling this new zero effluent technology than by selling paper. So it is not true that you cannot afford economically to do these things. You cannot afford economically to do these things because you want all the time what actually one mine owner himself told me are obscene levels of profit. If you want obscene levels of profit, then you cannot take care of pollution. But if you are willing to accept modest levels of profits, which are very reasonable, of course you can take care of pollution. And we should force our industry to take care of pollution or pay for pollution appropriately. And for all this, as Kulbhushan ji said, we must make sure that there is a process whereby all the development process ultimately is based on decisions which emerge from the bottom up. That the entire population of the country must play an appropriate role in making development decisions. And we have already a good legal framework for doing this. The 73rd, 74th amendments say that the Gram Sabhas, Ward Sabhas, local bodies have definite authority on making development decisions. And in Kerala, you have the famous case of Plachimada, where the cancellation of this license to Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola, I guess Coca-Cola factory by the Panchayat was challenged in the Kerala High Court by the company, and the High Court ruled that the company's claim was that the Panchayat is subsidiary to the state. State has given us license, so Panchayat cannot cancel it. The High Court ruled that no, the local people's welfare is Panchayat's concern. if they can show that the local people's welfare was adversely affected to the level that license needs to be cancelled, it can be cancelled. So we have this framework, but we are not using it. And you have other acts. You mentioned this Biological Diversity Act, under which each local body again can set up biological diversity management committees, which have substantial authority and power to look at local environmental issues, take care of what is happening. You have also the Panchayat, extension of Panchayat Raj to Scheduled Areas Act, PESA, by which the Gram Sabhas have been given very substantial power in the tribal areas. Again, this act is not being implemented, but we have provisions for giving very substantial power to Gram Sabha, essentially taking us from a representative democracy, which has a lot of flaws, to a much more robust direct democracy. And we can certainly continue moving in that direction, especially while modern technology in one way, as I said, makes human beings job prospects in great difficulty. The modern technology also means that with communication, people can readily participate in all sorts of decision making. And all over the world, there are now moves towards more direct democracy, and certainly we consider ourselves an IT power, and I think we should be thinking along these lines, moving towards that. So let me talk about two concrete examples of alternative possibilities where I have personally some experience. One is in the case of the forest areas. I have mentioned this Forest Rights Act, according to which the local communities, the Gram Sabhas in fact, become owners of, apart from individual lands, I leave this aside, they become managers, not owners, managers of community forests. The land will remain with the government and they cannot alienate it in any way, but the communities then have full authority to manage and take benefit from non-timber forest produce. And in the country, in the forested tracts, non-timber forest produce can be of tremendous value. And these are also the areas where the Naxalite menace, extremist menace is most acute. Areas which are richly forested, where have lot of valuable non-timber forest produce, and where if the forest community, local communities are given the management right, they will economically prosper to a significant extent, they will develop skills, and then I think this is really the only way you can combat forces like Naxalism. In Gadchiroli district of Maharashtra, which is one of the worst Naxalite affected districts, more than 900 village communities have won the community forest resource rights. And I'm working with some of them. Their level of economic, of course, well-being of these people has gone up significantly. Earlier, the government was giving bamboo to paper mills, not quite at 1.5 rupee a ton, but at exceedingly low rates. And these people were getting at best wages as for cutting bamboo. And for cutting one bamboo, they were getting at best 5 rupees per more 25 foot or longer bamboo. Now that they have their rights and they are managing per bamboo, their earnings have gone up from 5 rupees to about 35 rupees per bamboo. And apart from that, the Gram Sabha has, these are the wages the Gram Sabha pays the people, and the Gram Sabha itself is able to get significant income, which they can and they are using in a useful fashion. But much more interestingly, now the youth are becoming very interested in acquiring skills of modernity, in becoming managers of their forest resources. And they are trying to, as I said earlier, most of them go up to 12th standard and they fail in English and mathematics, and they were kind of in a rut. But once these possibilities of themselves having to manage these resources have come up, suddenly they have become energized. It is quite worth seeing and trying to figure out, working out things like marketing and so on, which they never thought of. All they thought of was just being labor cutting bamboo. Their whole horizon can expand and a new kind of society can be created. And when I'm talking about moving from predatory to mutualistic economy, this seems to be an example where earlier the bamboo was being taken away essentially at throwaway rates by the paper mill, giving very little to the people. Now they can begin to develop a really vibrant economy of their own. Hopefully this will progress. The other example, which is only might happen, but is a village called Kaure in Goa, again where I have been working with them for some time. The mine at the Kaure village is on the hilltop, which was their traditional, very large sacred forest, like Sapo cows, some 200 hectares or so of the sacred forest on top of the hill. That has been beginning to be destroyed by the mines. And I won't go into details, but Shah Commission report has a whole lot of detailed discussion of all the illegalities this mine has caused. So the lease is currently stayed. The Gram Sabha, interestingly, of the Kaure village, who have suffered a very great deal from this mining. Again, as I said earlier, like Chamban Mudi, from destruction of water resources, of agriculture, of all sorts of problems with very noisy and in fact accident causing truck transport, over truck transport and so on. They are saying that now that it is clearly established that the lessee has done all these illegalities and destroyed the environment to this extent, they have established on their own a so-called Kaure village Sadhana multi-purpose cooperative society. And they are applying that you give us the leads. And many of us anyway were working as laborers and so on, and some of them are educated young people who believe they can manage, and they should clearly be given some opportunity to get into this. That we will then manage mining by ensuring that it is not overly destructive of the environment and the benefits come to us. And they say, okay, you want mining, it's an essential economic activity. India cannot afford to stop mining, we agree. But India can and should afford to stop mining in the kind of lawless fashion that has been going on in Goa and unjust fashion. You organize throughout these kinds of cooperatives and get people to manage, run mines in a careful fashion. So these are the kind of alternatives which, as I said, a very limited way are emerging. But I believe these are the kind of alternatives which also we must be seriously thinking of, not merely stop at trying to halt particular projects, which certainly gives the impression to the society at large, and in a sense it is a correct impression, that the environmentalists or social activists are merely anti-everything, that they have nothing positive to say. They are only saying no to this, no to that, no to the other, which is not certainly going to work in the long run. So the serious challenge is for us to actually think of taking advantage of all our democratic strengths to develop ways of alternatives so that the predatory economy that is prevailing today can be converted into a much more sustainable and harmonious mutualistic economy. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here. And as Ken Sharma has said, I welcome all kinds of questions. He will talk about organizing this discussion. I look forward to a vigorous discussion. Thank you.